All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the first NAGDA webinar of 2023. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Matt Peterson, and I'm NAGDA's Executive Director. Our topic today is a big one, the recently passed Secure 2.0 legislation. There's a lot to cover, so we want to get to it quickly, but before we begin, I wanted to let you know a few things. We are recording this presentation. It will be emailed along with a copy of the slides to all of the registrants tomorrow, so you'll get a copy in your inbox of both the recording and the slides. You'll be muted for the duration of this webinar, but please submit questions to all throughout the presentation in the Q&A box found in a menu at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will only be visible to the speakers, so please feel free to send those anytime. You can fire away right now if you like. We'll get as many of those as possible at the end. We'll also have the chat feature open, which you can use with your fellow attendees during the presentation. Just realize everyone can see those chats, so be careful with this. To start, I want to thank some of the people and organizations who've made our advocacy possible. Some of our legislative priorities have been on our list for decades, and it's the tireless commitment of you as members and sponsors that have helped us push them across the finish line this year. First, I want to thank our visionary and premier sponsors. NAGDA, of course, is a mission-driven nonprofit. Our goal is to be the collective voice of the public sector DC plan sponsor community. We could not meet that mission without the generous support of the companies you see listed here and many others. With their support, we've been able to keep our costs low for government members, to encourage as many of you as possible to continue your NAGDA membership so we can amplify your voice on Capitol Hill. In fact, their support has allowed us to maintain the same cost for government members since 2006. So when you consider how prices have changed for just about everything else, especially recently, we find that pretty remarkable. So we know your budgets are tight. It's our sponsors, especially the companies you see here, that have allowed us to keep membership affordable. Each of these companies has sponsored us for many years. So thank you to our sponsors for being terrific examples of good long-term partners. And developing our legislative priorities that were included in Secure 2.0 was a process many years in the making. The group behind the scenes who helped us do a lot of the hard work of picking priorities is our legislative committee. For every provision we decided to adopt, several others were weighed and debated and discussed. It's an incredibly dedicated group of volunteers. You can see their names listed here. Thank you to all of you as well for helping us ensure that our priorities represent the priorities of our members. While the committee is essential to the process, NAGDA's ability to influence this legislation also came directly from our government members. I can't emphasize that enough. This year especially, we asked you to do two things. Join us in Washington for our first ever legislative fly-in, which you can see the folks here who showed up, and join us in virtual meetings with congressional offices from your states to make sure they knew how Secure 2.0 would affect government employees. You answered our call. And while the list of people who joined us in Washington and online is too long to mention because we do want to get to the webinar, you know who you are, and thank you for your help. We truly couldn't have done it without you. Finally, I want to thank the team from Groom Law for everything they did to help us this year in communicating our priorities on Capitol Hill. They represented you as members very well and were endlessly patient with me. So there is no better team than Brigham Winters, who isn't able to join us today, Diana McDonald, Michael Krebs, and David Levine. Thank you to all of you for your work this year. And without further ado, Diana, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody. We are excited to be here today to talk to you about Secure 2.0. This is a huge bill with more provisions. We knew it was a big bill. We've been looking at various drafts of it for a couple of years, but when you're sitting down just about Christmas Eve, reading through this legislation, you realize just how big a bill it is. So today we're going to hit some highlights for you. We won't be able, of course, to hit all of your questions, but we will do our best to hit some of the big points that you would like us to. Carly, if you'll go to the first slide for me. Thank you. So yes, as I mentioned, this was signed into law December 29th. So the president had already left for vacation, actually, and he signed it while he was in St. Croix. How nice that the rest of us were not in St. Croix enjoying New Year's with him. But so Congress did pass it right before Christmas, and it wasn't signed until the 29th. This, as I mentioned, was the beginning of the culmination of years of legislation. Y'all remember Secure 1.0 that became law in 2019. And sort of after that, at some point when they were building Secure 1.0, they had to say, hey, enough, we can't afford, we have no more room, we have to stop at some point. And so they said, okay, any other provisions you want will get rolled into Secure 2.0. And so for the last couple of years, these bills have been sort of building to collect the scraps that weren't in Secure 1.0. And there were 4 bills originally, and you can see them on your screen. There was one bill from each of the committees of jurisdiction, right? So you've got Ways and Means in the House that was dealing primarily with the tax code, and then Ed and Labor dealing primarily with ERISA, and then the same thing over in the Senate side with Finance and Help. And yeah, so those 4 bills went through a long process to become law, and the House and Senate staffers worked throughout August, September, and October to sort of smush these all into one big bill that met the committee's needs, met the chairperson's needs, and we got the big bill that we ended up with. So I will pause there and go to the next slide.
So I guess on this next slide, I guess I'm supposed to pick up here. Thanks, Diana. And we're going to bounce around a little bit today. And to begin with where Diana did, one quick note. We are watching the questions and we see them already rolling in. So we will adapt our presentation on the fly to try to answer them as best as possible. So I'm going to hit the first thing. And I know that number 2 is what so many of you, given the questions we've already gotten, are asking about in 403 BCIT. So Michael, I guess you're going to have a lot of fun with this one in a second. The elimination of the first day of the month requirement. For just to give a little bit of background on this, as people know, the issue that people have had to deal with for a long time is that 457B plans for governmental entities have had this sort of, you need to elect in advance of the month to make your deferral contribution. This is something NAGDA has been focused on. It's kind of an odd piece. What has happened is in Secure 2.0, effective for years beginning after enactment, you don't need to do the first day of the month. You can change a deferral election in a 457 plan up until the time you can actually get the money. Now, in real world practicality, there's probably some back and forth where you need to feed it to your record keeper so the record keeper can get a file and all that. So it's not instantaneous. And I think it's important that some of your participants in your plan might need to know that. But long and short, welcome to the world of being more like a 401k plan. And that's a good starting point. But I know the bigger question is 403B CITs. So I'm going to hand it to you, Michael.
Sure. Thanks, David. So let me just talk for a minute about 403Bs and CITs. I think there's been some confusion around this piece of the bill and this legislative priority. I think there was some hope, and there was a bipartisan consensus at one point that 403B plans, at least institutional ones, should be permitted to invest in collective investment trusts. The securities laws create issues for that because historically, 403Bs were viewed as retail accounts, and so they are typically not permitted to invest in the types of make the types of investments that retail investors can't make. And so there was a push in Secure 2.0 to allow 403Bs to invest in CITs to give some parity with 401k plans. And there was a long discussion about that. And at the end of the day, they were not able to reach a bipartisan bicameral consensus to allow 403Bs to invest in CITs. And that is largely because I think that the provision that they would have to amend to allow that is under the securities laws, and that expanded jurisdiction outside the labor and tax committees to a new committee. And we just didn't have time. There wasn't enough time for Congress to kind of grapple with all those issues and deal with it. So long and the short of it is they included a provision in the bill that for tax purposes acknowledges that 403B plans can invest in 81-100 group trusts but then does not make the necessary securities law changes to permit that investment. So long story short, no change to the fundamental rules here. So anything you could do before, you can still do, but unfortunately not broader access for 403Bs to CITs.
Great. Well, I know that there's a lot of questions on that, so I'll just keep going forward at this point and sort of talk about some of the other items. And these are in some ways a little easier to tick off. And I know we may have more questions seeing them in the chat in the Q&A. I keep bouncing to look at it and we see them continuing there. Let's talk about 403B and 401k hardship rules. We all know that 403B plans and 401ks are not identical, but they have been slowly converging over the past 20 years. And one of the distinctions that was made by legislation in the Trump administration was that 401k plans got an expanded class of hardships that you could actually use, like non-elective contributions, earnings on deferrals. Through drafting hiccups is my nice way of putting this. It wasn't included previously. And Secure 2.0 basically makes the change. And oddly, I believe the effective date is like after 23. So it's a little bit of a unique thing here. But it makes the change so that the 401k and 403b hardship rules cover the broad range of sources, which is just a good, simple improvement for 403b plans as we go forward. Another item that may have impact a portion of you, but not everyone, is health insurance distributions. You can basically get $3,000 a year out of a plan to on a tax-free basis. This provision has been around for a long time to basically pay for health insurance costs for certain retirees. The Secure 2.0 change expands it a bit in that it makes it clear now that it can be directly paid to an insurer or to an actual participant with the self-certification. I know many of you in the land of hardships have seen the growth of self-certification over the years, and this is yet another example of that. Similarly, there are some public safety provisions here about first responder disability payments, about how that's treated, distributions to firefighters, especially for those who are private firefighters, can get out money at age 50, and that's the expansion of the withdrawal. And a lot of these provisions are in effect now. I'm not going to go weedy on it at this point because we already are pretty far in and we're on our first slide, but that's a couple examples right out of the box. So with that said, should we move on to the next slide?
Let me just touch on here really quickly, and then I'll pass it over to Diana. The automatic enrollment. The bill does mandate generally that new plans of a certain size going forward use automatic enrollment, but I will point out that that mandate is not applicable to governmental plans. So no automatic enrollment for the public sector or church plans. No automatic enrollment mandate there, but everybody else will going forward for new plans be subject to that mandate.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I just, for participation incentives, you will know that right now current law prohibits anything other than a matching contribution being used as a participation incentive. This will now allow de minimis financial incentives like a small gift card that are not paid for with plan assets to be used to encourage contributions. And that one is effective for plan years beginning after enactment.
Great.
David?
So should I run through the emergency savings accounts issues really quickly? So there are a couple pieces of this bill that were designed to help people deal with emergencies, to use their 401k or 457 or other account to address emergency situations. There are some very specific public sector emergency first responder specific provisions in there to allow tax-free withdrawals or penalty-free withdrawals, I should say. But more broadly, there are two provisions that people have been considering. The first is that there's a provision that would allow a plan to make available a $1,000 per year distribution, penalty-free distribution for emergencies. A participant, plans that elect to have this, the participant could take that $1,000 per year out of the plan. You can repay it within 3 years. You can take one of those distributions every 3 years unless you repay it, and then you can take it annually. That's an optional feature for plans going forward. And then a similar idea under this law, they create emergency savings accounts. They call them pension link emergency savings accounts. It's kind of a misnomer in that they are emergency savings accounts built into 457, 401k, and 403b plans, effectively a Roth sub account that allows a participant to save $2,500, no employer contributions, though employers can match against the contributions made to the ESA into the rest of the plan, and the participants can take out that money whenever they want. You'd have to actually build this out as a Roth account in the plan and separately account for it. Some complexities there, but the accounts themselves, the idea is to give people access to about $2,500 worth of savings for any reason at any time, penalty free. Should we go to the next slide?
Makes sense. Diana, I think that's you. And you're on mute.
Hi, sorry guys. Yeah, student loan matching is me. And we know that this has been something that plan sponsors and plan participants have been clamoring for quite a while. And the way this one's written, it allows a 401a, 403b, and a 457 plan to permit employees to designate their matching or non-elective contributions as Roth contributions. And those student loan contributions are Roth contributions. So they're not matching contributions aren't excludable from employee income, and they're 100% vested when made. And so that one has already taken effect. That took effect on enactment. So off you go with all the spare money you've got. Go forth with student loan matching contributions.
Great. So I'm going to pick up a little, and I know we have one question in here. Sorry, I'm flipping between the Q&A as we go, and I know Matt will chime in at some point with some more for us. One person asked us to clarify the 457 item, which means I must have said it unclearly, so I apologize. In short, legislation like this is painful because it sometimes says it's effective for participants' tax years. It sometimes says tax years. It sometimes says plan years, which is kind of a chop suey type of like mess of trying to figure it out. For the 457 change, it is for plan years. Sorry, is for taxable years beginning after enactment. But what does that really mean? Given that almost all the 457 plans I've ever seen have a calendar year, it would basically mean it applies now for the first of the day of the month rule. That's the short answer. I hope that adds some clarity. Let's go back for a moment and talk a little bit about the catch-up changes. So there's IRA indexing on limits and stuff like that. I'm going to sort of leave that alone and like your IRA catch-ups, something for those of us over age 50, like me, very excited. At the same time, putting that aside, inside your governmental plans, let's talk about a couple different things. First, there are higher amounts for people between ages 60 and 63 that they can actually put money into their catch-up contributions. It's like the lesser of 10,000, which will be adjusted by, the greater of 10,000, which will get adjusted by inflation, or I think it's 150% of the regular 414V catch-up. And we know that there's all these questions. I see them in the sidebar. I'll come back to this in a minute about the interaction of catch-up. So rather than wait and let you ask at the end, I'm going to try to answer a little up front in a moment. But the key is that's one change that basically means more catch-up contributions later as people are getting later in their career near to retirement. I know in some governmental entities, of course, 60 to 63, a lot of people might retire at 58. So we recognize that it might have a slightly different impact, but it is the framing that has been put into this. And I believe this provision goes into effect in 2025. That's the general rule on it. Now, separate and distinct from that, unless my colleagues tell me I've forgotten the wrong dates, but I try to keep notes before we started. But separately, there is also Rothification. And that's a big deal discussion that's actually on the radar at this moment. Because it's come up a lot. We've gotten this question from a number of members on the committee. We've gotten this question from clients. We've gotten this question from reporters. I know we have reporters with us here today as well. And in that discussion, the question is, all right, my plan doesn't offer Roth. Unlike in the 401k space where Roth is, to use my big word of the day, ubiquitous, the Roth is relatively common in 403b, less common in 457. It kind of came later down the road for 457b, for 457b plans. But it's going to, but 414v, the age 50 catch-ups are required to be Roth starting after this year. And if I have one thing that you should be thinking of, if you don't have Roth in your plan and you want to keep catch-ups, and the key thing is this applies to people who in the prior year had more than $145,000 of compensation. So it's a bit of a look back also. It's important to figure out, what do you need systematically on your system to record Roth contributions? Do people, now arguably it's not 100% clear, you should still be able to do a spillover type of election where you say, if I max out, it goes over into the catch-up contributions. There's nothing in the law that says you can't do that. So it's not like you need all new contributions, but there's a lot of systematic items here. My guess is that some of you who have the catch-ups and you're going to want to keep the catch-ups, you might just add Roth. I know that that's a change. For those of you, like we have NAGDA members, we were talking on the legislative committee, someone has 1,000 different employers that are actually in their 457 plan. Trying to get everybody's payroll systems, that's a number one priority if you want to keep catch-ups that you're going to have to do. Because don't forget, the age 50 catch-ups also have the quirky universal availability rule and other requirements, although there's arguments they don't apply in governmental plans. We can go down, I've clearly started going down the rabbit hole, and Diana will reach back and grab me in a second, I can tell. The key takeaway on this though, is you need to think, well, how are we going to track Roth? And more importantly, just like Matt talked about, a lot of the sponsors for this program who really help out NAGDA, they drive, for most of you, a lot of the operations. How are they going to be able to handle Roth? What is their system settings going to be? The great news is if you look at those folks, they've been dealing with Roth for a long time. But an immediate thing to consider is, what's the process? And each record keeper and TPA will have different approaches. And it's important to understand that now as you go forward. And if you're in a multi-vendor situation for a plan as a governmental entity, getting everybody aligned, payroll systems and vendor alignment and vendor processes are going to be a real big thing as we go forward. So those are a couple things. I could spend hours, we get it. I'm going to add one last piece because I've spent enough of everybody else's time, so I apologize to my colleagues. We've already had the question many times. Well, there's the special 403B catch-up. There's the special 457 catch-up. We're still looking at it, candidly. But the way it's written, the Rothification, is it really focuses on the 414V catch-up rules for the age 50. It doesn't seem to focus on the other ones. So our position at this time, and it's going to evolve, to be very honest with you, is that we expect that that it's only about the age 50 catch-ups, which adds a little more complexity when you're figuring out which contribution catch-up contribution am I using. But that's our take for the moment as we go forward. Now I've gone on and on. I know we'll get more questions. I think I am handing over to Michael. Do you want to talk about some of the investments a little bit?
Yeah, let me just flag a couple of things on the investment fronts. I think there's a question in the Q&A box about new benchmarks for target date funds. There is a provision not applicable directly to governmental plans in Secure 2.0 that requires the Department of Labor to issue new rules around benchmarking target date funds. As most of you know, the existing benchmarks are not, it's not always, there's no perfect solution to benchmarking target date funds. And it's particularly with custom target date funds, it's been a bit of a challenge. So there's some direction there for the Department of Labor to redo those rules, at least with respect to ERISA covered plans, which, you know, may be helpful for the rest of us in terms of understanding their thinking, but it's not directly relevant. As for the other investment and lifetime income reforms, I'll just flag that there were some RMD rule changes to allow better allow partial annuitization. But the big one in the bill is really around QLACs, and QLACs are deferred annuities. It was a Treasury reform from the Obama administration that allowed plans to provide these deferred annuities. You know, you invest a certain portion of your account in an annuity, and it kicks in to provide lifetime income when you hit 85. I'm just making that number up, but it's a deferred annuity, and there were limitations on the percent of your account value, as well as hard dollar limitations on the purchase of QLACs, as well as some issues with spousal consents. And this bill kind of wipes out those issues and makes some changes to the original Treasury rules, which I think most people have perceived as being pretty helpful if you're interested in offering QLACs. Diana?
Well, I was going to add one thing, Michael, if you'll indulge me. For many of your governmental plans, you've lived in a reasonable and good faith interpretation of the RMD rules over time. And a lot of the time that's involved your partial annuitization and everything, because that's what came out under the Pension Protection Act. You have reasonable and good faith. So some of these rules add more clarity. At the same time, you still have that reasonable and good faith. So it's important to keep that in mind. But of course, each record keeper and vendor that supports you probably has a slightly different process. So it's important to understand how they work. Apologies for jumping in, Diana.
No, you are fine. If we want to go to the next slide there. So real quick, RMD changes. I know we have kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to put a pin in that for just a minute and kind of run through at a real high level all of these other ones. Terminal illness. This one creates an exception for the existing 10% early withdrawal penalty for individuals whose physician certifies that they are not expected to live more than 84 months. And that one is effective upon enactment. And then let's see, domestic violence here. This is a new one. And this allows withdrawals of not more than $10,000 or half of the employee's vested account. So that's the lesser of. That amount can be recontributed. And that's a really important one that I know a lot of folks on the Hill were pushing for. Because it is such a new concept, that one is not going to be effective until after December 31st of this year. So December 31st of 23. There's surviving spouse. Under current rules, of course, a designated spouse beneficiary can treat, right, a deceased IRA's owner as their own IRA. As far as RMD rules, this law expands that to plan rules. And so that spousal beneficiary can now irrevocably elect to be treated as the employee for RMD purposes. And that one is effective for calendar years beginning after December 31st of this year, so 23. Hardship self-certification. I know we've seen some questions about this. Well, what about this situation? That's a little hard to answer in a webinar format. It's, right now it's a facts and circumstances test. And so right now the new law says that a plan administrator can rely on that employee saying that it was an immediate and heavy financial need or an unforeseen emergency. Then that they can take a hardship withdrawal. The administrator can also rely on the employee's certification that they aren't taking more money than they need. And I know that's a big change. And so that one is also effective beginning December for plan years that begin after December 31st of this year. Qualified birth and adoption. Secure One had a bit of a glitch in that it did not limit the amount of time that parents had to repay that amount and still have it qualify as a rollover. This states that a distribution has to be recontributed within 3 years for it to qualify as a rollover. And so that 3 years is something that I'm sure you've seen in disaster declarations and other similar withdrawals. And so this is effective for distributions made after the date of enactment. For prior distributions made under Secure 1, the repayment period ends December 31st of 2025. Next bullet here is permanent disaster relief. You guys know with every hurricane, every flood, Congress has had to pass their own disaster relief rules. This puts it down as a uniform set anytime there is a federally declared disaster. And so the rules here are up to $22,000 distributed per participant per disaster. That money is going to be exempt from the 10% early withdrawal fee. The inclusion over gross income can be spread over a 3-year period, and amounts can be recontributed to the plan beginning the day after distribution over a 3-year period. And there's special rules on home purchases, and it increases the maximum loan amount. And that one also, that one is effective for distributions made after enactment effective for disasters occurring on or after January 26th of 2021. So we have a bit of a retroactive one there. Long-term care. This one says, of course, plans right now can only make distributions for approved reasons. And right now, long-term care is not one of those. This allows retirement plans to distribute a certain amount per year for long-term care insurance contracts. The amount that can be distributed is the lowest of the amount paid by or assessed to the employee during the year for long-term insurance, 10% of the employee's vested accrued benefit, or $2,500. And so you have to look at that every year. That $2,500 is indexed, and of course, the withdrawals would be exempt from the 10% penalty. And this begins with distributions made 3 years after the date of enactment. Qualified charitable distributions here. Right now, certain charitable IRA distributions up to $100,000 are excluded from gross income of the individuals, and those qualifying distributions also count for your RMDs. This change would allow individuals to make a one-time election of up to $50,000, which is indexed for inflation, to certain charities. And the change in the law indexes that $100,000 under current law and creates a new $50,000 limit for certain other charitable contributions. And so the new $50,000 limit for those certain other kinds of charitable contributions is effective after the date of enactment. The indexed $100,000 is effective for distributions in taxable years ending after the date of enactment. So let's head back real quick to RMD changes now that we hit all of those. It looks like we have about 2 minutes on this slide left. Michael, David, do you guys want to touch on these RMD issues? The age increase to 75, I know, is a big one. My uncle was asking me about this one at a Christmas party.
Michael, you want to go first? I'll follow you.
All you.
Me. Okay. So we have a number of changes here that go into RMDs. Why not make it as hard as humanly possible? So there's a phased process here, and I don't blame the folks on the Hill. This is all about budget. NAGDA supported this. We're not trying to say it was bad. It's just an evolution of the process, and it's never as easy as, hey, let's jump to 75 tomorrow, because there's a budget cost to this. Money stays in plan longer. There's less revenue. All those discussions. The key starting one is the age increase to 75. It happens over time. So the first one is 73. The RMD required beginning date is now age 73 for a person who reaches 72 after December 31, 22, and before 2033. There's this issue that's out there lurking. Short answer is does the step up happen again when we go to 75 or to 70 from 73? Does it happen in 2033 or 2034? There's some drafting that's a little bit of a hiccup here. The reality is even though the folks on the Hill probably don't have any desire to touch a retirement bill anytime soon, there will be another tax bill before 2033. So the good news is it will be addressed, whether it is 2033 or 34 for age 75 for the RMD to kick into effect from the current rise that we're having right now to age 73 for required beginning date, but we'll get some answers. The excise tax for not making an RMD, it goes down from 50% to 25%, which is, and it also even has a further reduction if someone corrects during a 2-year correction window down to 10%. Basically, in English, the excise tax is for not making RMDs, which can happen through no fault of anybody on this call, whether you're a plan sponsor, fiduciary, service provider. It lessens the burden. Also, just as a practical note, there are a number of ways you can already deal with the excise tax, whether it's EPCRS filings. And I realized we don't have much of EPCRS. There's some relief on self-correction that's in Secure 2.0 that might be of value to governmental plans, just a side note. And the key is it makes it better. Roth distributions at this point, and I'm afraid I'm going to misstate it, so I'll let Diana or Michael come correct me on this one. We've already talked a bit about annuities, so I'm going to leave that alone for the moment. But on Roth distributions, the idea is Roth, when it first came into effect for 401ks, there was the question: is it treated like a 401k, like regular deferrals? Because Roth deferrals are treated like regular deferrals, and you have to take RMDs during life. Or do you treat it more like an IRA, and you don't have to take Roth money during life? That was decided in a way that was less favorable to plans originally. Now the Roth rules are brought more in conformity with the rules. I'm pausing just because there's so many here. I'm always afraid I'm going to say it backwards. They're brought more in conformity at this point with the idea of IRAs. So Roth money, RMDs are not triggered the same way. And yes, there is one other thing that I just saw pop up in a Q&A box that I figure is worth mentioning as well. There's the discussion of treating the account as your own for spouse beneficiaries. This is a very interesting one. It's long been an issue, a discussion in the 403B space. It's something I think we could come back to another time, but there's a lot to that as well. I don't know, Michael, do you think I missed something, or would you like to correct me in any way? There's a lot here.
No, there's a lot. This is going to be very complicated. It's going to take some time for people to digest and some work to administer.
I guess that with Carly, next we head off to the next slide. Okay, I guess this back to me again. I knew Michael should have done the RMDs. That way I wouldn't have kept going. So the next thing we're going to talk about is overpayment recoupment relief. So this one is effective on an enactment. The key here is there's been a lot of discussion, and there's actually a funny backstory on this. There's been many of us who've had input over the years. Years ago, several of us at Groom, including on this call, had input into language on the Hill about overpayment relief because it's become a challenge, and for claims, especially in the defined benefit world, it is a mess to deal with sometimes, because employers and fiduciaries want to do the right thing and not like go hunting down people for money that may not have it anymore, but they feel bound by some of the rules. In simple form, there's a very complex provision that got added in in the final form, that it does provide relief on not going after people to collect overpayments, but there's requirements about not threatening people and other types of things you need to be very careful of in there. And not threatening is a good thing. I'm not saying that's bad, but at the same time, there's a whole bunch of requirements in there. Similarly, long-term part-time employees. This is something that was in 401k, and most of you don't have 401k plans, but it expands it to 403b plans. So if you have 403b plans and you have someone who works at least 500 hours for 2 years in a row, 403b plans are joining the world of, you have to let them in for deferral only, not for other contributions. That's a very simplified version. It kicks in, I believe, in 25. So you've got some time to sort this out at this point. But the key is the provision also adds, for those of you who've actually dug into it, a little bit of other nuance that is important to be aware of. For instance, there were questions about, well, what service counts for eligibility, for vesting, all these different things. If someone was a long-term part-time employee, it clarifies that a lot of things before 21, and in some cases before 23, don't count as service, which is a real positive approach for trying to implement. This is going to be a weedy. We have very little guidance even on long-term part-time employees from the IRS. It was basically, they put out some transition relief in 2020, I believe it was. And there were like 2 or 3 Q&As at most. We don't have much beyond it. We expect there's a lot here. And there's going to be a slide coming up about all the fun things the regulators get to tell us about, but we will get to that in a little bit. Michael, you want to talk about the last two? Oh, you're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, David. Just really quickly, I'll note that they did change the rules around electronic delivery for ERISA covered plans to require paper statements starting in 2026, subject to all kinds of limitations and caveats, but not one of the more popular changes in the bill. On the more popular side, they amended the code and ERISA requirements for DC plans to send notices to unenrolled participants to scale those down to just be a single notice of eligibility to participate. So that might be helpful for some people. And let's just bring this home with the last substantive slide here on provisions in SECURE. And I want to highlight one more on the next slide, on the credit slide, about the savers credit. There are a number of other provisions in here that we won't have time to really talk about, but as far as one of the biggest changes in this bill, they have restructured the savers credit. And the savers credit or I guess still is for a period, a non-refundable credit for low-income savers. And effectively, you get a tax credit to offset your tax liability. That is a percentage of the contributions you make to a retirement plan. There's a complicated formula with tiering, and it phases out pretty, for middle income earners. Because most low income earners do not have federal income tax liability, this credit was not particularly useful. And so for many years, there had been a push to make it refundable. In other words, to make it a pure government subsidy where a payment would be made, even if you have no tax liability. And that is what they've done here. They've simplified the formula and they've transformed it from a non-refundable credit to a refundable credit. And interestingly, a refundable credit that goes directly into a plan. It has to go into a plan or IRA. It doesn't go to the taxpayer directly. It's going to be a few years before that's implemented. Treasury is going to have to do rules. It's going to be very complicated to implement, but it's a big change to the current law.
All right, so this is an interesting one. We're going to try to we have a number of questions here. We have like 29 open questions at least right now and some others. We're not going to be able to get to all of them today. I thought, I and my colleagues thought that what would make a lot of sense is just to show you this slide and just hit a couple of high points for a couple of minutes here. And then we'll make sure that we have tons of time for question at the end. Because we keep mentioning it, there is so much to deal with here. A lot of these are Department of Labor, which congratulations are not your problem. But the good news is what they do will influence how the vendors who are on this call with you work, because they often will build special governmental features, but they do take a lot of lead. We know a lot of things like fee disclosure and everything, not binding on you as governmental plans, but a lot of people do a similar approach. Similarly, there's a lot of other things here about simplification, automatic portability, which I know Michael can talk to certainly, because he knows this better than almost anybody out there. Auto portability, and where people get cashed out of plans. Governmental plans do it less, but the DOL is really going to be moving forward. There's really material provisions out there at this point. Similarly, notices and notice cleanup. There's, as all of you know, there are so many notices, and this costs a lot of time and money. And the agencies were told, try to come up with something a little simpler here. Is there a way to make this simpler? Maybe for people who aren't in plans, you give them one notice a year. Not all of this is directly relevant to you, but it could make your life a lot easier. And if you're an employer that has 100 employees, it could be challenging. Or if you're an employee that has 100,000, it could be challenging at this point. So it's important to keep that in mind. Emergency savings is Michael did an incredible job of collapsing it, because there is so much to talk about on emergency savings. And I bet if you ask a lot of the service providers here, they will have solutions. We'll see what they get adopted. We'll figure it out and find out. But there is so much to do. And as we go forward, we're just going to have to see what comes up. That was my high gloss version of the regulatory and agency activity. Diana, Michael, anything that you think is worth hitting before we hand it back to Matt for Q&A?
Yes, I have a mea culpa, guys. I read my notes wrong on student loan distributions, and I'd like to apologize for that. I saw the comment come in like, hey, that doesn't match what I was tracking. So first off, yes, student loan distributions. You guys have, I'm sure, already memorized this, and that's how you were able to tell me that I had read my notes wrong. The change allows employer contributions to be made on behalf of employees for qualified student loan payments, so long as certain requirements are met. This is 403B and 457B plans. And so we, and this one is effective here December 31st of 23, plan years beginning after December 31st, 23. And let's see, I know Matt has questions, but I saw one of the questions that I will kick off with, which is the effective date for the whole bill. Early on, when we started, I mentioned President Biden's vacation because it affected the effective date of the whole bill. Congress passed the legislation on Friday, December 23rd. But President Biden wasn't able to sign it until the 29th. So ordinarily, a bill like this would have been signed very quickly because it held government funding as well. But there was a 1-week stopgap to keep the government open. And so then the bill wasn't signed into law until the 29th. So that is the 29th is the effective date for this legislation, not the 23rd when it was passed. Matt, all to you.
Yeah.
With all the 900 other questions.
I think that was a good one. Yeah, we, as David mentioned, we have 30 open questions. And we have about 10 minutes to get through them. So we're not going to get to all of them. I've kind of tried to bucket them in some of the simplest and maybe most helpful and most often asked categories. So we'll start with the catch-up rules, because that one has a lot of folks tripped up. So maybe I'll just I'll try to see if I can frame it in a way that can perhaps solicit some one-word answers or something close to it, just to try to make it clear. So the new catch-up rule, where catch-up contributions have to be Roth, does it apply to this special catch-up in the 457?
I want to give it.
I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. All right. So
I want to give a quick answer. I'm going to say our read is no.
Okay. That was our understanding as well. But if someone else has a different read of that, we can certainly, we'd love to hear it, and we'll certainly have that conversation. For the over 50, so for those for the over 50 provision, it is over $145,000, correct? So only the dollars that are over $145,000 have to be Roth as catch-up contributions. Is that correct?
Or for those I believe it is incorrect. I believe it is for people who had compensation in the prior year over 145, you are treated as being subject to the mandatory Rothification of your catch-ups. So it's kind of like you look back and say, how much compensation did Diana have? And Diana clearly deserved $100 million. And because she got $100 million, she is not eligible to do Roth catch-ups. Although if she got $100 million, she probably doesn't care about the plan.
Okay. So, and real quick, and I think that was an important point that came up also, in some of our previous conversations. You're looking back. So when this takes effect, would it be, what year are we talking about? You would look back at the previous year's salary and take that as the amount, and then that person's catch-up contributions would have to be Roth based on their previous salary from, say, 2023. Is that correct? And that would start in 2020.
That is my read, yes. So it wouldn't push it out to 25. I'm curious if Michael and Diana think I'm misreading it.
No, I agree with you.
It's easy for everybody on here. We will apologize if we've made any mistakes, and I will own it. There are so many little nuances. We're paranoid that we say it. So that's why we caveat so much. So we think we know it, but everybody's still working through the weeds on some of this.
Right.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I know that NAGDA has already sent out our legislative chart that goes through all of these provisions. And that chart is gospel. It's been checked by something like 20 some odd groom attorneys. Please, anything you find in that chart is 110% correct. So ignore whatever we might say that might be confusing and head to the chart.
Okay. And that was attached for those of you who saw the email and registered. When you got the email to register for this event, that chart, there was a link to that chart in there. So you can go back, take a look at that email. There's a link. We'll also make sure you see it again before this is over. Okay. Let's talk about hardship withdrawals, because we got a few about that one. There were some questions about which plans it applies to. So the new $1,000 self-certifying hardship withdrawal provision, does that apply to all plans? 401k, 403b, 457, everybody? Any?
I have to check that one, to be perfectly honest. Self-certification has already been implemented in lots of ways anyway at this point across different types of plans. Unforeseeable emergencies and 457 was a harder threshold, but it's basically converged. If you'll let us stick a pin in that for like 1 cent for 1 second here, we will answer that after you ask the next question. As long as it's not pointed to me, I'll answer it.
Okay. Well, I'll stick on the topic, but defer to someone else. A question for that one, is it optional? Is it optional to implement the self-certification if maybe you don't want to do that?
My reading, I think, says yes. Michael, that it's optional.
It is.
Okay.
That's the position we've taken, at least.
Okay. That's straightforward enough. I like that one. All right. So we got several questions on 403B CITs. Maybe this one, Michael, I'll defer to you on. Okay.
By
David
the way, Matt, I rechecked it right now, and the self-certification runs 401k, 403b, 457. It's secure, covers each of them individually, so it's clear in there.
Okay, great. So for 403B CIT, a lot of the questions are related to what's next. Where do we go from here? Is there a path forward? What would need to happen for CITs to be available in 403B? Michael, I'll kind of give that one to you, and then add some color if needed.
Sure. You need legislation. It's the long and the short of it, to allow 403B plans to invest in collective trusts. You basically need to amend the securities laws. They didn't do it as part of Secure 2.0, so Congress would have to take that up. Given that they just got finished with a broad, huge retirement bill, and they're probably unlikely to want to jump back in and do another one tomorrow, it could be a while. That said, people are still interested, and I think there's still at least some desire on the Hill to address this. It's just not clear when the topic is going to come back up and how we can move forward with it.
And Matt, to the point of where Michael just made, there are folks that we're already having discussions and hearing, even in the last day, who are like, yes, let's see if we can figure out a way to do this. I think we tend to be on the conservative side of getting it through. So we're saying it's not clear it'll happen immediately, but there's definitely folks out there that we're in discussions with literally since we had our legislative committee call yesterday.
Right. And on our legislative committee call yesterday, one of the questions came up, hey, is this something that NAGDA is going to continue to advocate for? It was a consensus of that group that we would continue to back that provision in the future. Obviously, we'll talk to the board about it, but I don't see that going anywhere for us. So we'll continue to stay engaged. And for those of you out there who are 403B members, the more voices we have and the more people who are saying, hey, this would be really helpful to us, the better, but the odds are that it's going to get across the line. So I would put that out there to all of you as well, to say that the more help you can give us on making the case for it, the better off we'll be. Okay, were there any other questions you saw on there that you wanted to point out really quickly? There are a couple other kind of more nuanced ones that I saw that I can get to. Okay. So a quick one, and I think you kind of addressed this, David, about the emergency, $2,500 catch-up provision. They were asking, well, what happens if you take out money? What happens next? I think that's really an implementation problem. It would mostly depend on the solution that whoever's providing the account would have to help you with. There aren't any rules, I don't think, as to how this looks on the other end, as far as I know, but I would defer to you on whether there's any more detail on how some of the mechanisms would work.
I'm looking straight at the screen at Mr. Krebs to see if he knows. I don't have it right now, to be any information right now.
Yeah, neither do I at the moment, unfortunately.
Okay. And just to clarify, we did get one more on the catch-up rule. If you don't currently have a Roth, so if you're pure pre-tax dollars and you don't have Roth, could your folks who are made over $145,000 last year, once you hit the effective date, can they use catch-up? My understanding is that would be no, and you would have to add a Roth component. Is that correct?
Can you say that one more time? I'm just trying to make sure I got that right.
Sure. So if you don't have you're purely post-tax pre-tax dollars right now, and you have Roth, and you have somebody who makes over 145 or made over 145 last year, they can't use the 50-year-old catch-up provision unless you add Roth to your plan. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's the real challenge with it.
And I did mention the non-discrimination. There's this whole discussion about the universal availability for age 50 and whether or not it applies to governmental entities. Like, we've done some analysis, it gets messy in this. And there may be a path here if you don't want to do it that shuts it off. But inevitably, the people you're going to want to do, forgive me, is the physician or the basketball coach who really wants to use it anyway. So there's both a member relationship and other discussions to be had here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we're at time. I think the common refrain here has been that, hey, there's a lot to cover. We knew that we weren't going to get to all of it in an hour. We're well aware of that. So expect to hear a lot more from us. We're going to be doing several Connect conversations, webinars, putting out reports, infographics, anything that we can do to help you understand what you need to do as administrators to make sure you're doing the right stuff. So we really thank you for your membership and for attending today. Thanks a lot to all the folks at Groom. Do a really great job. Keep firing your questions to us. Send them, email me, email the organization. We'll get as many answers as we can out to you throughout the year. We'll be working on this all year. So thanks a lot. It was good seeing you, and take care.